Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. This is John Richardson. I'm actually speaking with you from Toronto, Canada, and this is one more of my ongoing series of podcasts for the American Expat Financial News Journal. And today, it's my privilege to introduce to you Vince Truong, who is a U.S. citizen, chartered financial planner who is actually based in Dubai. And it is very, very clear that people the world over have got to be much, much more consistent with not only the acquisition of their wealth, but the management of their wealth. So past, present, and future. And Vince has, I think, a particularly interesting story. So welcome, Vince. How are you doing today?
Thank you, John. I'm doing very well. Real pleasure to be speaking with you.
Likewise. Well, why don't we start with where you are, your company, and then what I'd like to do is that's where you are. I'd like to take a trip backwards and talk about how you got there. So, you're living in Dubai at the present time, and what is it you're doing in Dubai?
Sure. Yeah. So I am in Dubai. I'm a private asset manager or wealth manager, slightly different in terms of how I see it. Working with a company called GSB Capital, and we're based out of an area called the DIFC, which is kind of like the Wall Street of Dubai. So it's a financial district. Yeah.
Okay,
And that's it.
so people would find you at what, gsbcapital.com?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, and I'm sure people will want to check that out after this interview discussion. So here you are, a U.S. citizen living in Dubai. Let's go back a little bit in time. It's always interesting to know how a U.S. citizen ends up outside the United States generally, but particularly in Dubai. So let's go back in time. I understand actually that you were not born in the United States.
That's correct. I was born in Vietnam in a small city south of Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, they call it now. And my father was in the South Vietnamese Air Force. He was a fairly senior Air Force officer. And basically, at the closing of the war in 1975, anyone who was a senior military officer, they and their families were flown out of Vietnam by the US Air Force. We were the only ones who were allowed that kind of treatment. And it was the kind of thing where people were like scrambling and fighting to get on that list to get flown out, because everyone else who came after us left the country in boats, and they're known as the boat people. But we were flown out by the US Air Force to Guam, and then from Guam to the US, and we were dropped off in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And my father had already known a lot of US military officers and soldiers through his time training in the US during the war. And so we had a lot of connections. And really, I was only 3 years old at the time, but I think very fondly of those times, because to me, that was like the best of what America is, was all these generous people who helped us out, who gave us clothing, who gave us a car, who let us stay at their place, and really allowed an immigrant family to get on its feet.
Wow, that's amazing. So you presumably have no memory, no early memories of living in Vietnam, then I guess. Is that accurate?
That's correct. A few flashbacks here and there, but no real solid memories, no.
Interesting. So, like many, it's interesting because so many of these podcasts I do revolve around people born in the United States and before the age of 3. They leave and they're regarded as these accidental Americans. So, you at the age of 3 had, can I call it sort of an enhanced evacuation opportunity?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
to get
correct.
out, to get out of Vietnam in 1975. You came to the United States, and for you, I guess the United States was always home then.
Yeah, definitely the US is home. Um, to be honest, I'm kind of glad we lost the war, because I got to grow up in the US, and I wouldn't be here in Dubai doing what I'm doing, living the life that I live, if I didn't get that opportunity through the US. So yeah, very thankful for that.
Very, very interesting. So at some point, then presumably, I assume you naturalized as a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, that's correct. When I was a teenager, probably like 14 years old, yeah, became a naturalized citizen.
And where were you living at that time?
California, spent most of my childhood in California,
Mhm.
growing up basically.
So you basically grew up in California. Now, what part of California? That's a pretty big place.
Orange County, Irvine, like south of Los Angeles.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're growing up in California. Many similarly situated Vietnamese people there at the time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wasn't far from a city called Westminster, which was known back then as Little Saigon because it was the largest Vietnamese population outside of Vietnam at that time. Um, so basically, when the US Air Force flew the first wave of refugees over, they dropped us off in four different locations. One of those was Camp Pendleton in near San Diego. And so that population moved to Orange County and basically started this area called Little Saigon with a large Vietnamese population.
Wow, that's really something.
Yeah.
Okay, so you graduated from high school, and I'm guessing you have a college degree from the general part of the world.
Correct. I went to UC Irvine in the city that I grew up in. Got a bachelor's degree in philosophy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah,
took a ton of philosophy courses as an undergraduate too.
yeah.
Uh, all right, so
Philosophy
that,
school.
yeah, great stuff. Any particular area that captivated your imagination?
Huh. From the philosophy perspective, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think probably the most useful thing from philosophy, because a lot of it is kind of useless, but in terms of the real world, but the most useful thing is logic and just being able to, given it's a very Western way of thinking in a very linear manner, but logic impacts everything I do in terms of how I think and how I communicate, and it helps me, I think, to be very clear with my clients who are Western and who share that linear logic kind of background. So I think the logic was the most useful aspect.
That's absolutely fascinating. Now, do you mean like formal symbolic logic? Was that what you're talking about?
Yeah, as sort of the basis for it, right? The foundation that you build on. But then when you convert that to just normal communication, I think it really is helpful to be clear, concise, gets you to the point.
Yeah, it helps you organize your thinking. And as you can tell, I do have some background in this. Do you remember the textbook you used?
No, I'm afraid not. No, it's been way too long.
Mhm. No, very, very interesting. I mean, I think that is actually a great background for, precisely how you're using and structuring your
Yeah,
thinking in that.
yeah. It,
Now,
it
now you,
definitely helps me in my career today, no doubt.
uh, yeah, so, young people doing career planning take note of that. And,
Mhm.
I would agree with that. Now, you said something else that I think is fascinating. And that is that you talk about logic, linear thinking as a Western concept, if I heard
Mm.
you correctly. Would you just take a moment and contrast that with something that's not linear thinking, not Western? And
Sure. I think in I don't want to over generalize or stereotype too much, but a more Eastern way of thinking, I would say, is more associative. So it's not about having to um, follow a linear order or even a linear timeline. Is more about how ideas relate to one another. And so I think for Americans or Westerners who go to an Eastern culture, they really have to sort of reconfigure how they communicate to this culture because it is a little bit different. But having said that, the world is much more homogenized these days than ever before. And so maybe I think that contrast is maybe not as stark as it used to be.
no, but it is interesting. So the way you talk about it, I would infer you to be implying that uh, Western thinking is more of a process and Eastern thinking is more of a collage.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Well, thank you for that. But that's not
Sure.
primarily what we're here to talk about.
No,
Great
no.
stuff, anyway. Okay,
Yeah.
so you graduate with this degree, this general degree in philosophy. What happens next?
Yeah, I kind of floated around a bit. Philosophy is not something that leads to a one specific career. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So for a while, I was kind of just doing various part-time jobs, working especially for an insurance brokerage. And that kind of got me into this world of employee benefits, where you're doing like group health insurance, group life insurance, things of that nature. So yeah, and that's kind of from there. I would have, I'd be going to companies, talking to employees, and then the employees would be asking me other questions on a more individual basis. And initially, it was more like around, say, individual life insurance, but eventually that would evolve into investments and other things. And so I gradually got into more of the wealth management aspect of things.
So it's like a collage of events, more than
Yeah,
more than
exactly.
a linear process.
Definitely not a planned linear timeline. No.
Very, very interesting. So let me just, if I can put it in my own words. So it sounds like that it was an evolving consciousness of all things financial. Would that be right?
Yeah, and because really, when I was at university, I had no idea what I would be interested in, and then it eventually I realized I actually really love dealing with money and wealth and assets and managing it. And strangely, because I'm not really greedy. It's not about the money per se. Uh, it's just not how I'm wired, but it's all the things around that. And yeah, that actually became something that I really became quite passionate about.
Hmm. And so I'm guessing that the next step to sort of bring these things together was to get it's the CFP designation you have, right?
Yeah, correct.
Designation.
Certified financial planner. Yeah,
Okay, that's what you did then. Um,
yeah,
so just briefly, what is that designation? What's required to get it?
sure. I'm pretty sure the requirements may have changed since I got it back in 2007. Trying to remember, there's probably roughly 6 core courses around things like general financial planning, investments, taxation, estate planning, insurance. And then there were like sort of like extracurricular type courses, and maybe you had to do 3 or 4 of those. Each of the courses had an exam that, yeah, so you after at the end of each course, you took a final exam. And then once you finish all the required credits, then you sit a final exam covering everything. And it used to be an exam that was a day and a half long, and it was very, very rigorous. And if I remember, the pass rate was quite low. I think today it's only a 1 day exam. I think people today are getting it a little bit easier than we did.
Hmm. But you list those topics,
Mm,
and those directly relate to the sort of collage of things that were important, right? I mean, I think that one of the things that people mistake they make when they think about this stuff is they're too narrow, right? They
yeah,
separate investing from the tax, from the this, from the that, and
yeah.
uh, you know, uh, and it's interesting because your current firm seems to consolidate all those things, right? Which is I think quite interesting. But okay, so you get your CFP designation. This is 2007 in California.
Yeah.
What next?
So at that time, I was working with a company called LPL Financial, really, really good company, very professional. They're a what we call a broker dealer in the industry, but basically, it was a company through which you are essentially an independent contractor, um, acting as a wealth manager through their umbrella, so to speak. And gosh, they must have something like 15,000 wealth managers now. They're quite large. And yeah, so I was working with them, but at the time, I'd also have been hearing about the UAE. I read an article written by 2 American professors in tax and finance. They were working at the American University of Sharjah at the time, and they wrote this article just um, really talking about how great it was to be an expat in the UAE. And back then, we have this thing called the foreign earned income exclusion, where you can exclude the first X amount of your salary from taxation. So today that's like around $112,000. So you don't pay tax on the first $112,000. And then above that, today you would start at the next marginal income tax rate, which is I think 24%, let's say. But back then you would start at zero. So you would make whatever it was back then, let's call it $80,000 tax free. And then whatever you made after that, you began at the zero tax rate and moved up the progressive tax rate. So, and then they just talked about, just overall how great it was living in the UAE. And so that really intrigued me about this place. I had never heard about it before. I never heard about Dubai or the UAE. Sharjah is another city in the UAE next to Dubai. And so, I was never really a person to stay in Irvine, California. Irvine, California, we called it a master plan community. It was basically perfect in every way, very little crime. To me, it was like the Truman Show. It's just too boring. And so I was not really interested in staying in Irvine or in California or even the US. And so I was intrigued to potentially consider going overseas. So I went, came to Dubai to visit. This is back in, I think, 2004. And I had lined up a job interview with AIG, and they were based out of Sharjah. So that was a big insurance company. And I came out here for an interview with them. And while I was out here, I met the CEO through a friend of a company called Holborn Assets. And he was the one who encouraged me to go further into the financial planning world and then to come back and work for him. Because he was like, Vince, you'll be like the only American financial planner out here. Business is going to be so easy for you. You're going to make a killing. And that's kind of how he recruited me to come back out.
Is that true? At least at that time, that you would have been the only American financial planner?
Yeah, it was definitely true at the time. And it's been true for most of the past 13 years that I've been out here. There have been various American advisors here and there. None of them really lasted. And as far as I know, I could be wrong. I'm still the only one. I could be wrong. I'm definitely the only CFP in the UAE.
That is absolutely fascinating, because I think you and I would both agree that the financial planning and advisory needs for any U.S. citizen far exceed that of any other nationality. Would you agree with
Yeah,
that?
no, that's correct. It's a lot more complicated because we're taxed everywhere in the world, and so you need proper advice when you're an American expat. And so yeah, I mean, the UAE. First of all, when I came out here back in 2009, no one really had heard of it back then, and people would think of Dubai as the country, right? I mean, Dubai is just a city, and so over time, Dubai has built a real reputation for itself. I think people know about it now. And first off, Americans, as a people, we're not as likely to go and live overseas as people from other countries who are closer to the rest of the world. We just don't do that as much. It's commonly known that a much smaller percentage of our citizens even have passports.
Do you think
So
that's
America,
because
since
of geography, or do you think it's because of attitude, or both?
I'd say both. We are more isolated geographically speaking. The country is very large in and of itself, but there is an attitude of, well, why would I need to go anywhere else? Like, aren't we the best country in the world, right? And so, yeah, I don't think as many Americans even think about living overseas compared to, say, for instance, the UK, who once had an empire where the sun never set, right? They're used to being very global. We're not like that.
And do you think that America would be better off if Americans had a more global outlook?
What would make How would we define better?
Oh, I don't know, a uh, more innovative, better worldview, uh, more tolerant. For example, I mean, the U.S. tax code, really discriminates against certain cultures.
Yeah,
Uh, you know,
I, I do think we are better people for having stepped outside of our comfort zones. I do think America would benefit by having more of its citizens around the world to represent the nation. To be honest, our reputation, especially right now in the Middle East and in the area where I'm in, our reputation is not as strong as it used to be. The world is changing, and if Americans stay in their bubble and don't realize the world is changing, that doesn't help us be successful on many levels going forward, whether that's economic and financial or militarily or however way you want to put it. I think we benefit from understanding the world more because we are increasingly living in a more multipolar world versus a one superpower world. And you're seeing more regional powers now. And that's the world that we're heading to. I don't think it's going back. And where it would really hurt Americans one day if they don't know this or understand this or prepare for this is if at some point we lose our global reserve currency status. That's going to be a huge shock to Americans living in the US.
Yeah, that would not be life changing. That would be life ending.
You can make an argument for that for sure. I mean, I don't think we realize how spoiled we are by having reserve currency status, how much influence and power that gives the US. But reserve currencies, I mean, before us, it was the pound, right? Nobody gets to have that status forever. And many of our policies are, I'm not trying to be political here. This is just, I mean, I think really just in terms of economics, our policies are pushing the world away from the dollar. It's not going to happen anytime soon because there's no viable alternative. But if the US dollar remains the reserve currency of the world on the day I die, I will be shocked.
Interesting.
And if and when we lose that reserve currency status, I mean, think about what that does towards, people think inflation is high now. Wait till, people are not needing to buy the dollar and the dollar becomes so weak and anything, you better hope that we're going to start manufacturing everything back at home again because importing it is going to be much, much more expensive than we've been used to for the last 30 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Now you said that, or strongly implied anyway, that you think U.S. current policies are pushing the world away from the United States in that respect. Could you comment on, one, two, or three of what you think those policies might be?
Hmm. Yes, I could. I think you want me to just say what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, yeah, I do. This is a fascinating conversation.
Um, right. Let
Or
me
not,
try to.
or
Hmm.
not. It's up to you.
I mean, no, I'm happy to. Let me try to explain things from the perspective of people living here. Russia attacks Ukraine. A lot of people would say that's a terrible thing. I have I have a handful of Ukrainian friends. It's tragic for them and their families. My heart goes out to them. I've supported them through personal means. So obviously, I'm not in favor of Russia attacking Ukraine. But our response to that, in terms of seizing assets, um, and basically trying to pigeonhole and isolate Russia. I know why we did it, but what that communicates to the rest of the world is, well, don't have assets in America, don't hold assets in US banks because they can just seize it whenever they want. And we can't trust them. So we lost a lot of trust in the eyes of the rest of the world. We also, I know this is going to be difficult for Americans at home to understand, but we also come across as bullies. I know that we come across as Ukraine's heroes for people living at home, but to parts of the world, and not just Russia, but say India, certainly China, even here in the Middle East, we come across as bullies because, yeah, we can just seize your assets, and because we have reserve currency status, we can just make you a pariah in the world. And not everyone, I know this is hard to understand, but not everyone is against Russia. And I'd say that a large part, nobody likes the idea of like one country invading another, but at least 40% of the world is not so against it that they would just, try to freeze Russia out the way that the US and Europe has. So not everyone agrees with the US and Europe on this, is what I'm trying to say. And we probably are not aware of that if we're just living in the US.
Oh, I think that, well, that's certainly true. If you just read the Western media and that. But I mean, I think um, what I'm understanding you to say, in part, is that it is entirely possible to disapprove of the Russian invasion on Ukraine, but equally disapprove of the American response of sanctions and this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And undergirding all of this is the idea that this is another form of cultural colonial imperialism, where we are espousing our way of looking at things and forcing it on the rest of the world. We might completely disagree with it, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but I'm saying that's how it is received, that we're being bullies and we're being imperialists. And, I mean, go the whole issue with the World Cup in Qatar, and, the freedom to express solidarity with gay rights. We assume that everyone should share our same values as if our values are an ethical absolute. And so we try to sort of bully them into seeing it the way that we do. Um, and let me make it very clear, this is not my personal view, but countries around here, it's against their culture, their law, their religion, um, to be in a gay relationship. And so you're trying to say that you're better than them, so listen to us. I'm just using it as another example, and it's obviously not just the US, but
No,
it's an
I mean,
example of,
I think the basic problem is, okay, that if you can't see things from the perspective of the other guy, you're really just dealing with half a brain, so to speak.
yeah, even if you take it back to a more selfish motivation, in order for you to be effective and impactful in the world, you have to understand where other countries sit without assuming by default that you're superior to them, because we often come at it from that angle. And for instance, and again, this is not political in any way, but the way Biden automatically, Sheikh Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, the way he was automatically demonized, fairly or not, it's not my point. But before we even took the time to have a conversation, we cast him out as a pariah, so to speak. And then what was the result of that? We get into a situation with the pandemic, inflation, oil prices, and then we need to go back and sort of, in a way, indirectly apologize for how we treated you in the beginning, but now we need your help. So the point is that we started from a position of assumed moral superiority, which um, I'm not saying we're right or wrong. I'm saying we don't understand the people that we're trying to
So
deal with.
you're saying that to proceed on the assumption is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I certainly would agree with you on that. I mean, it just seems to me that uh, in life generally, regardless of whether you're dealing with the neighbor next door or the country halfway around the world, it always makes sense to try to understand their point of view and get along.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's probably always the case. Well, I mean, it's pretty clear that given the percentage of countries that are not going along with these U.S. sanctions, et cetera, okay, that that speaks for itself. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of living proof of the stuff that you've just been talking about. But okay, so here you are in Dubai, obviously in a position to see the world from a different perspective, and generally in the United States. Um, so I presume you've got a lot of U.S. clients in Dubai,
Yes.
and I mean, how would you advise a U.S. client in Dubai differently from, let's say, you were back in Irvine, California?
Yeah. First off, when you're out here in financial services, it has historically been the wild, wild west, very unregulated. And so you have a lot of bad actors in my industry who work on a business model that came from like the 1980s from a US perspective, where they're just trying to sell financial products for commission. And so what ends up happening is Americans get caught up into a lot of products that are very disadvantageous for them and for which they cannot easily get out of and could easily be penalized very heavily from a tax perspective. So you get a lot of bad advice. And so I've spent a lot of time over the years helping American expats who get into these things extricate themselves, or we're stuck in it. Now we have to make the best of a bad situation. That happens pretty constantly.
With that Malta tax tree, that Malta pension thing, which I don't know a lot. I mean, it's something that I've read about a lot, but never really understood it. But would that fall into that category of things you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a classic example. It's probably the most egregious example. And basically, what happened was there were financial companies who created these so-called pensions based on the U.S. Malta double tax treaty, and they were trying to find a loophole where Americans could put money into these products. I don't even want to call it a pension, more of a investment product. And the idea was it's like a Roth IRA without limits because you would put after tax money in, money that you already paid your taxes on, and they would be in this Malta pension. And based on the US tax treaty, it could grow tax deferred and you could take it out at least 30% of it later on tax free and basically treat it like a real pension where you get tax advantages. So that was being heavily promoted to the American expat population, not only here, but I know, like for instance, in Asia as well. And that started around like I think maybe 6, 7 years ago. And I looked very carefully at it, read a couple of tax opinions, and I walked away thinking, I'm about 60% confident that this will work, but 40%, a 40% chance of being wrong was way too much for me to be willing to use that product. And so I never got into it, but I know a lot of advisors who did. And I work with clients who, before they met me, got stuck in them and rue the day that they did, because now it's causing a headache because last year, I think late last year, the IRS came out and basically said, we don't recognize this as a pension.
Right. That
So
that was the sense that I remember from the article. So yeah, okay. So presumably, what was going on was step one, reading the tax treaty. Step two, understanding how the treaty could be used to shelter certain kinds of income from U.S. taxation. Step three, creating a product, okay, to try to match that, which they were calling a pension, resulting in, I think, step four, the Treasury made a decision that they weren't going to treat that particular thing that was called a pension as really being a pension, thereby negating all the presumed tax advantages. Have I got that right?
yeah, no, that's exactly right. And by the way, these types of entrepreneurial attempts still exist. And I know that there are things still being promoted around the world, certainly in Europe. So they're still out there. So anytime you get a product that didn't originate from the US, let's say, and it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true, as is always the case in finance. It was
Well,
too good to be
especially
true.
especially
Yes.
given the presumed punitive U.S. taxation of anything that's foreign. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you're almost starting, it seems to me, with one hand tied behind your back because,
Yeah.
I mean, as I read the U.S. tax code, you see the word foreign in it. 5 words later, you're going to see the word penalty starting with 10,000 bucks.
That's not entirely untrue. But yeah, no, it's always, Yeah, it's always better to just keep it simple, and use U.S. domiciled investments,
All right,
basically.
now let's talk about that because
Yeah.
being a simple-minded person, and the older I get, I can assure you, the more simple I feel. Okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I think that there's a saying, simplicity is virtue. How do you, in general sense, I mean, what is your attitude towards wealth management, and how do you advise people, Americans abroad, specifically in the context of let's keep it simple but effective?
Yeah. Even though Americans are taxed all over the world, the UAE has no income tax. Versus if you're an American expat in Europe, you're obviously taxed locally and you're going to apply tax credits and double tax treaties, right? In the UAE, there is no income tax. So the only tax you're going to pay is tax to the US if you're above the exclusion levels, yeah? And so it is a potentially lucrative place for an American expat to be. And they really need to take advantage of that time to secure their future when, let's say, you're a married couple, married filing jointly, and let's say only one of you is working, but you earn more than the exclusion of like around 112,000 this year. But then you add in like the standard deduction and maybe you make IRA contributions, you get to like $150,000 before you pay any tax. So you have to really take advantage of these times and start planning for how you're going to secure your future with this advantage that you have. But the reality is, people come here and Dubai is very, very enticing for living a fairly posh lifestyle, let's say.
Living
It's,
beyond your means, living
yeah,
beyond your means. I got to
exactly.
tell you, I have helped a number of Americans in Dubai expatriate. I have never in my life seen a group of people with such incredibly high incomes and such low asset levels.
Yeah, no, that's no surprise at all. This is an Arab culture. It's honor, shame based, like for instance, East Asia as well, and many Asian places. But basically, honor is everything, so to speak. And so, how you look before your peers, how you dress, the car you drive, the watch you have, all that stuff, people care way too much about that over here, and it gets quite silly. So yeah.
Well, the way you talk, the way to save a bunch of money and in Dubai is simply is live like behave like an American and not like a Middle Eastern or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep your wits about you. I'm not sure that Americans at home are necessarily better at saving that,
They're not.
either.
Well, they're not, but they don't have the opportunity. I mean, part of the
Yeah,
problem with the U.S. tax code is it's very punishing even at the lower levels.
yeah.
I mean, this is actually an interesting point because I was talking to a tax preparer in Canada who was helping somebody expatriate, and what we discovered was fascinating. Was a very low income person, but even at these low income levels, they're paying a lot more U.S. tax than in Canada, and Canada is generally a far higher. I mean, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean, I had this fleeting thought. I don't know if it's really true. I mean, is the U.S. tax code actually set up, for people of modest means to support the wealthy?
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, one has to ask that question. I mean, it's extraordinary. But in any case, what
Hmm.
I'm getting from this is that um, that you're saying that because UAE does not have income taxes, that coupled with the existence of the foreign earned income exclusion as a base, as a starting point, that there really are opportunities for younger Americans to come over there and consolidate a bit of cash if they're
Yeah,
careful.
I mean, like, okay, depending on where you're from, the US, the cost of living here is not outrageously expensive. It's not Singapore, it's not London, but it's actually to me quite comparable to where I'm from, Orange County, California, right? So it's not cheap, but it's not also not incredibly expensive. And it just depends on what kind of lifestyle you want to live. But if you're like, say, a young American in your 20s, early 30s, maybe getting started in your career, and you're married and you don't have kids, that exclusion of 112,000 is per person. So the husband gets it, the wife gets it, and that's 224,000 before you pay any tax. So I think it's especially advantageous if you earn less than that exclusion to basically make tax-free money, which is
Mhm.
outrageous, right? I mean, that's an incredible opportunity.
Well, it's an incredible opportunity. On the other hand, though, it's an incredible opportunity only because Americans have citizenship taxation.
Yep.
Uh, I mean, I know and have known over the years a lot of people from Canada who go to Dubai and they don't think like this at all. I mean, they just think, well, I sever tax residency with Canada and that's it. I live in Dubai.
Yeah.
But it is, I think I would agree with you that in a sea or an ocean of punitive citizenship taxation, Dubai is an island of opportunity, I think, for a
Yeah.
certain, put it that way, for a certain kind of person. That's interesting. Okay. So you're advising your American and you're saying, well, hey, be aware of the opportunity. Let's not be an idiot here and see if we can put together some capital while you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
You're saying, beware of the charlatans who are trying to market things, okay, that are going to get you into trouble under the U.S. tax code. What else? I mean, I think I heard you say that you were generally an advocate of using the U.S. financial system and tax code as your retirement and financial planning guide. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, I think it's important. Two things I think are very, very critical when it comes to planning for the future. One is you need to actually have a plan, and most people don't. And you need to start developing. It's not that you need to know exactly what's going to happen because you don't, but you need to have some idea of what your ideal future is going to be like. And most people often don't really care about their future selves, so to speak, right? They've done like brain scans of people when they think about their future self. The part of their brain that gets activated is the same part of the brain that gets activated when they think about a complete stranger. So, in other words, they're completely detached from their future self and don't care about that person. So, you may not emotionally care, but you need to make the smart choice to start preparing for that person by having a plan in place. And that plan can involve where are you going to be in the future, what are your expenditures going to be like? What is your potential income going to be like? What do you need to do differently today? Like for instance, someone might open an investment account and just do whatever without any idea of like, for instance, should I be in this asset or this asset? Should I be aggressive or not? But if you have a plan, then you can answer questions like, here's how much I have to save. Here's how much risk I need to take, even though I'm only comfortable with this risk. And then these are the types of assets that fulfill the return and risk parameters that my plan requires. But most people don't have that kind of plan at all, although there's lots of tools to even create simple plans out there for free.
They'll
But
just open an IRA or something and let it sit.
yeah, but that's why you get a situation where we are now, where how many Americans close to retirement are nowhere near being ready. I have no idea how we're going to finance this, right? Social Security is clearly not going to be enough. I'm concerned that we're going to be a very poor nation in the future because we're not ready, right? Because people didn't have a plan. Younger people today, I think they're better informed. There's a lot more information out there that's available if they want to get it. And so, but my point is, there are lots of tools out there. There are people like me out there. The more sophisticated things get, we can make more sophisticated plans for you. But the point is, you need to have some kind of a plan, knowing that it's an evolving roadmap that changes as life evolves. But it's kind of like if you're playing darts, you wouldn't throw darts on an empty wall, right? You would hang up a target. And if you hang up a target, even if you don't hit the bullseye, at least you're close. And having a plan is like hanging up a target for darts on a wall so that you have something to aim for in the direction that you're going in. So I think having that plan is very critical.
Yeah, very, very interesting. What's that saying? If you don't fail, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Something,
that's
something
exactly
like
it.
that. Yeah, I think that's. I mean, as far as I can see, there's only one thing that distinguishes, those who reasonably successfully plan for retirement and those who don't, and that is the first group makes the decision to do it. That's it.
Yeah, no, that's Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, you know, the people who come and find a person like me are people who are not just floating along in life like I was in my 20s, but yeah, they're thinking about the future and they want to be serious about that. And I think everybody needs to be, because who are we hoping is going to bail us out in the future if we're not ready? I mean,
Oh,
who's going to do this for us, right?
nobody
Yeah,
is the answer. Yeah, no, that's exactly
absolutely
right. I mean,
nobody.
there's no comparison between, the world that I sort of grew up in, uh, and the world we're in today. I mean, I grew up at a time when, America, I think, was the dominant world power. I think it's a very important world. I don't, but I share your view that,
We,
gradually it's becoming less and less so, et cetera.
yeah, yeah, we still are the dominant world power because of the reserve currency status and because of our military, right? We are still the dominant power, but people are sort of like don't respect us as much. Yeah.
Well, that's the first step. I mean, I think that was it? I first heard this from Clinton, a Clinton speech. I doubt that he made up the line, but he said people have always been much more impressed with the power of our example rather than
Mm,
the example of our power.
yeah,
And I think
that's a good
that's
quote.
like totally spot on. Okay, I see this as not an issue of military power. I see it as an issue of not even moral authority, but a sort of moral example. That people kind of buy into, and I certainly would agree with you that that is
Yeah.
dissipating, and that is what is the foundation for the military power, not the other way around. And there's no, I mean, you know, 100 years ago, 100 years ago, 1922. The dominant world power was Britain, I guess, reserve world currency.
Right.
Could people have imagined where Britain would be 100 years later at that point?
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
doubt it.
See, here's the thing, right? I mean, this is true of history and life, and it's definitely true of like, how people deal with money, which is that we always take the recent past and extrapolate it indefinitely into the future, as if this is the way it's always going to be. And that is a critical, critical error. This happens in, like, for instance, take businesses during the pandemic and all the tech companies who did so well when everybody was locked down started expanding and hiring and opening new warehouses, only for the pandemic to eventually end. And now they're caught out and they're having to lay people off. You know, we have to always ask ourselves, why is this happening? What are the conditions present that allow it to happen? Will those conditions be present in the future? And if we're not asking those questions, we're going to set ourselves up for failure. And the U.S., we cannot assume that we were once like a country that everyone respected and looked at, especially during the Cold War, right? Um,
Well, that
that's
was a
changing.
bipolar world.
Yeah, exactly. You had to choose between us and basically the Soviet Union, but it's changed now. But if we in the U.S. are still thinking that we're still like everybody's favorite country and everybody wants to be an American, we're very wrong, and we're not
Very
setting
wrong.
ourselves.
Very,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're not setting ourselves up to be successful in the future on basically all levels, and we're going to be like you know Rome with the barbarians at the doorstep who will eventually knock it down. And this happens so slowly that you don't notice it until one day it happens, and then the barbarians are in Rome, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, we need to protect our reputation, our strength, if we want America to still be the primary superpower in the world. And maybe it's inevitable that we're going to lose it because nobody's a superpower forever,
Oh, I
right?
think it's inevitable. The question,
Yeah,
is how long it does it take? But I think that's one question. But I think the second question is, what is your role in the world when you do lose it? I mean, you don't want to lose it and be hated. Okay, you want to lose it and
yeah,
be respected.
yeah.
Uh, and that's sort of a delicate balance. I'm not sure, what the view is of the British at this point, but I mean, it was 100 years ago, where I think if we were having this conversation, we would be presuming that, the center of the world was London and Britain, and that's clearly not true today. But, my thought on this is that you need to get back to the United States and run for Congress. It's, I think you're saying a lot of things that are very, very important, not only for Americans, but for the future of America.
Mm,
Vince, looking at your website,
mm,
and again, this is gsbcapital.com. A part that I found fascinating, and I appreciate you think this doesn't apply to Americans particularly, but part of the whole process, the GSB Guide to Repatriating to the UK, where
mm.
you have this whole section on, sort of global mobility and, what you have to be careful of, when you establish tax residence in a country and all this sort of stuff. And I thought that was really, really interesting because, one of the big problems in the world today, on the one hand, there's more global mobility from an immigration point of view that we've ever had, but on the other hand, these tax regulations are so problematic that, people aren't careful in how they move from one country to another. I mean, they
Yeah,
can lose their shirt.
yeah.
I mean, do you have comment? First of all, maybe explain why you think that isn't as applicable to Americans as other nationalities, but maybe comment on it in general.
Well, who it's really applicable to are non-Americans who are moving to America. Completely applies to them, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Do you counsel people in
so
that regard?
say again.
Do you counsel people in that regard?
To be honest, not a whole lot. I've had other colleagues who had clients who were moving to the US, and I would often have to help them out. And like often it's a case of, okay, this product, this investment, you don't want to hold this while you're in the US. If you can get out, you need to get out. Or you've got this huge capital gain on this property or this asset, you probably should just reap the capital gains now, you
Well,
know?
especially if it's not taxed where you are.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, because these are all expats who, like, the rest of the world doesn't get taxed in Dubai the way the Americans do. So yeah, they have no taxes to pay. So they need to reap whatever gains they have, before becoming a U.S. taxpayer. So it definitely applies to that. But then there's all these things like, you have to learn about all these different accounts you're going to have to start filing on and reporting. You probably need to simplify things and consolidate things. And so yeah, there's a lot of planning involved for those people. For normal Americans, going back to the States, well, because we're taxed the same wherever we are, I don't think too much really changes, or that there's too much that you really have to prep for.
Well, what would
Probably,
you advise to inventory all their non-US assets and accounts and either get
yeah,
rid of them?
yeah, sure. But that should, I mean, for the financial assets, hopefully they're already reporting those
Yeah.
on the FBAR, and so they should already be aware of that. I think if for somehow, because this still happens strangely, I can't believe it, but it still happens. There are still American expats who never file their tax returns, and they're going to go back, start getting a W-2 again, probably get back into the system, and the IRS is going to be like, "Hey, where are your returns for the last 6 years?" That would be a big problem for someone who hasn't been filing.
Yeah, I think that for those who who are planning on going to or back to the United States, I do think they've got to deal with the tax situation before they get there.
Yeah,
That'd be my
yeah,
general advice, but whatever. Um,
yeah.
okay. So I mean, this is really fascinating stuff, and I thank you for this conversation. Could you, as we come to the end here, just describe in a general sense? So we have gsbcapital.com, sort of the Reader's Digest, one or two or three sentence version of what it is you actually see yourself as doing. Like what's the product you're selling?
Okay. I am a little bit different than the rest of the company. Okay. So I'll just answer it from what I do specifically.
Mhm.
Um, I manage assets directly. So I am an asset manager. And I said at the beginning, I'm a private asset manager more than a wealth manager. Most wealth managers, the asset management is farmed out to the company or to a third party asset management firm. There's typically an extra layer of fees. So I do all of that myself. I manage roughly about $58 million for roughly 110 clients. And so that's a little bit different because very, very few people in my industry do that themselves.
You actually make the investment decisions.
Yeah, all of that. I run my own models. I do most of my trading. I have some administrative help to do some of the trading, but all the decisions are based on my models. I've been doing this for 18 years, and without tooting my own horn too much, I'm probably at my peak in terms of how well I'm doing this, and especially now having gone through two recessions and facing a high probability of another recession. I am more active taking care of my clients through a full market cycle, especially the end of the market cycle when it really, really becomes important. Um, I've never met anyone in my industry who does the amount of work for their clients in that space that I do. And again, I'm not bragging. It's not that, but I have a lot of passion for this, and maybe I'm speaking out of my passion that I really care. I used to care a lot about my technical expertise in asset management. Now I care more about, I'm 51 now. Now I care about what impact am I actually making in a person's life now and down the road. So I really want to change their lives in a positive manner. And that's why I'm so involved. And no third-party asset manager will ever care about them the way that I do. But the second thing that I do besides asset management is run these financial models to help them come up with a plan for their future, because they may have all these ideas about different things they could be investing in. Could be property, could be a business, could be crypto, could be art. There's so many opportunities out there. And I can take each of those assets and run a comprehensive model so that you can see things holistically so that you can optimize your decision making. Because otherwise you're just kind of like, picking at things out of the air and you have no cohesive plan. And maybe you think you're like a really conservative investor, and yet, maybe you own three private company investments and you think you're being conservative because you diversified across three private companies. So yeah, just understanding how much risk is embedded in your net worth and across all your assets, and understanding how they play with one another, interplay with one another in terms of risk and return, and whether they actually help you get to where you want to be.
Wow, that's great. And you know what? That was a fantastic statement. I mean, I enjoyed listening to that. You know, I can sense your passion. I mean, you are a fiduciary, I think,
Yeah.
would be the right
Yep.
word. And on that statement, I think I'd like to end our discussion for today and perhaps pick up. And again, now, where would people contact you?
Well, they can find me on the website that you mentioned. That would be the easiest way. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just look for my name on LinkedIn. There's nobody else doing what I do with my name. So yeah, won't be too difficult.
All right. And so this is especially for, American citizens outside the United States.
Correct.
Here's somebody who thinks about you as an American citizen outside the United States. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Vince, for spending this time with me today. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I have learned things, and it's interesting to hear your view of the world. Is there anything you'd like to add into today's discussion before we end today?
Um, Nothing that I haven't already said. Other than that, I'm really thankful to have this chance to speak with you. I hope that people will hear what I'm saying and take it to heart, especially with regard to the fact that, from my understanding, more than half of Americans over age 55 are not going to be able to retire. And I'm really, really scared about what's going to happen 10, 20 years from now. So I hope this lights a fire under you to get serious about your personal financial well-being.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very, very much. And I'm
Thank
speaking
you, John.
today with Vince Truong. Thank you.
Thank you.